This week, Ducati announced the specs of their new V4 Granturismo, a variant of their Panigale V4 engine that will power the upcoming Multistrada V4. And it contains a pretty significant update in that their typical desmodromic valve system will make way for a more traditional spring-actuated valve closure. So in today's video, we'll take a look at why they've made such a big change, as well as compare the power figures to the adventure bikes that the Multistrada V4 will be going up against when it hits the market next year. But before we get started, if you're new here and you want to see all of the latest new bike releases for 2021, then please do remember to hit subscribe. They'll be coming thick and fast over the next couple of months, and I'll be covering as many of them as humanly possible. So subscribe now to see those videos as soon as I upload them. Let's start with a quick refresher on valves then. They open and close to let air and fuel in and out of the combustion chamber, and are typically pushed open by a cam rotating on a shaft and closed by a spring. Back in the olden days, the springs were a bit rubbish because of limitations on manufacturing and design, so they would sometimes close too slowly when the engine was revving hard. This meant unburnt fuel could escape, which led to worse performance when you needed it most. Fortunately, someone came up with desmodromic valves which used the cam and rocker arms to both open and close the valves. This meant that valve closure was super precise, which led to better performance at the top end. Sounds great, but unfortunately they're a bit of a pain to maintain and require regular servicing to keep them running smoothly. Most motorcycles use spring-actuated valve closure because they're better than they used to be and easier to maintain, but Ducati have stuck with Desmo over the years. In fact, to many owners, they're one of the features that makes a Ducati. They're about performance and flair rather than pragmatic practicality, and to some folks, the expense of running a bike can actually add to the prestige of ownership. So why would Ducati all of a sudden abandon one of their trademark features? When the V4 engine was introduced to the Panigale range in 2018, it was already a big step. They'd predominantly been using V-twins since the 1960s, but the performance benefits they'd experienced in their MotoGP bikes made it a logical step for their superbikes on the road. Peak power was up on the outgoing Panigale 1299's V-twin, partly owing to the fact that the new V4 could rev out much higher. In their World Superbike homologation special, the V4R, their V4 engine can generate an incredible 234 horsepower, up at 15,250 RPM. And that's where the Desmo system really does its magic. But is anyone seriously going to be revving the balls off a big adventure bike like the Multistrada in the same way that they would a Panigale? Probably not. Adventure bikes focus more so on usable low and mid-range torque that can be applied on the road as opposed to the track. And with long distance touring much more likely on this type of bike, it'd also be great if it didn't need a major service every 15,000 miles. So in comes the V4 Granturismo. Although peak power is down at 170 horsepower, it's delivered at 10,500 RPM, and a similar peak torque of 125 Newton meters is delivered 1,250 RPM lower than the Panigale at 8,750. At this rev range, spring-closed valves will do the job, and getting rid of the Desmo system means that service intervals have increased massively to a whopping 60,000 kilometers or 37,000 miles, which is way beyond what many owners will cover before they move on to another bike. To me, it seems like a super practical move that will be massively beneficial if you are doing a lot of miles. And how many of us would realistically notice the difference between Desmo valves or spring-closed valves when you're actually riding it on the road? Not many would be my bet, but it's still set to divide the Ducati customer base. Just a quick scan of the Ducati subreddit, and you can see that on the one hand, there's praise for the new longer service intervals, which ought to save owners a chunk of cash. But on the other, there are those that are disgruntled that Ducati have moved away from what is said to be a superior system, and also a factor in giving Ducati a certain prestige of ownership. But I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Does it matter, or are Ducati just making the best choice for this category of motorcycle? Let me know down in the comments. For context, the Multistrada V4 will be going up against adventure bikes like the BMW R1250 GS, the Triumph Tiger 1200 or the KTM 1290 Super Adventure. None of them can match the power of the new V4, with the KTM closest at 158 horses peak and the other two under 140. Both the BMW and KTM have more torque with about 140 Nm each, whilst the Tiger is roughly on a par with the V4 at 122. So whilst the twins will have more low-down grunt, the Multistrada V4 ought to be the most powerful adventure bike on the market and by a decent stretch. On top of that, the V4 Granturismo is more compact than the 1260 V-twin that it replaces, being 85mm shorter lengthways, 95mm less tall, and only 20mm wider. They say that this allowed them to optimize the position of the engine in the frame for better balance, and there's also been a weight reduction of 1.2 kilograms, and that's despite adding rotating mass compared to the Panigale's V4 to give more of a sensation of low-down torque. The crank, clutch, rods, piston and flywheel are all new for the Granturismo, and revised intake and exhaust ducts, smaller valves and smaller 46mm oval throttle bodies help to shift torque delivery into the lower revs. Other features of this engine inherited from the Panigale V4 include the counter-rotating crank, which can help to improve agility by counteracting the gyroscopic effect of the wheels, and the twin pulse firing order. The left two cylinders fire closely together, followed by the right pair to generate a unique sound as well as smooth power delivery with strong traction driving out of corners. The V4 Granturismo does, however, get one final new feature, and that's rear cylinder deactivation. It's a concept seen on other bikes like the big Indian V-twins, which helps to keep the rider cool at a standstill by switching off the rear cylinder, which of course generates the heat closest to the saddle. The front cylinder, or front pair in the Ducati's case, keeps the engine spinning so that the rear can kick straight back in as soon as the throttle is applied. A neat feature that makes a lot of sense on a bike like the Multistrada that might be used for navigating slow-moving urban traffic if you're touring. So it seems like Ducati have put a lot of thought into this new engine, and I can't wait to see the new Multistrada when it launches in November. We've already seen a few spy shots and it looks pretty awesome combined with the engine specs we've found out about this week. Ducati also confirmed recently that it'll be the first production motorcycle to feature a front and rear facing radar system in order to improve comfort and safety. Developed in collaboration with Bosch, the front-facing radar will enable adaptive cruise control, which will automatically feather the throttle and brakes to maintain a set distance from the vehicle in front. And the rear radar enables blind spot detection, which will alert the rider to vehicles not visible in their mirrors, whilst also detecting vehicles that are approaching from behind at speed. Now, BMW did announce their new R1250 RT this week with adaptive cruise control as an optional accessory, but the Ducati will be the first to feature sensors at both ends. The Multistrada V4 looks like it'll be an incredible tech-packed machine to rival the best of the best in the adventure segment. So if you're new here and you want to see my in-depth coverage of that bike when it's released on the 4th of November, please do remember to hit subscribe, and I'll catch you then.